Thanks a lot, everyone, like for showing the interest and your introductions on the core batch. And you guys must have seen that we actually have a diverse group of people from different geographies, people who have uh, like experience from probably ranging from like 6 years, 7 years into the industry to around 20 years plus. People who have been working on cloud for like more than 5 years to the people probably who will be starting for the first time. So we will start from basics, and as I said, our aim would be to achieve cloud certification, cloud practitioner certification in around 4 to 6 weeks, and cloud solution architect associate in around 12 weeks time. So let's see how that goes, and it will be different pace for different people. A few people might would like to do the cloud solution architect associate like within a month or so. So please feel free to go ahead, and few people might take more time, so that's perfectly fine. So we'll try and ensure that almost everyone achieves both the certifications. So I believe, as you can see the screen, if you go to the link aws amazon.com/certifications, it does tell you the different available certifications that are there, and quite a few people, you guys must already be knowing it. For people who are totally beginners and would like to learn the learning path for the basic foundational course, and it is good even for people who are not technical, mainly into marketing roles or operation roles, or who just need the functional knowledge of the cloud or the benefits of the cloud. So this is a certification which is a good one for that. And then, if for the technical people, we dive deeps more into the associate level certifications, and we have three associate level certifications: solution architect associate, which we'll be focusing in on after achieving cloud practitioner. And those of you who would like to dive deep more into it for specific roles, we'll talk about the different roles also in a moment. But yeah, for sysops administrator, you have solution architect associate, sysops administrator associate. For more developer focused, we do have developer associate certification. Then we have professional certifications, which are quite hard, I would say. Like, I have done all the associate level certifications and the professional level solution architect certification, and it's quite hard. It actually tests your not only knowledge, but other things like time management during the exams, your critical thinking ability, along with the AWS knowledge. And similarly, for the roles who are morely into DevOps, they have a DevOps professional certification, and specialty exams goes into specific. I know that few of the people in the group are here into networking domain for long, so for them, I think advanced networking specialty could be a path. Security, I believe security is like the most important thing in the cloud. So if you are planning to dive deep into a cloud, do plan for security later on. Take some time to learn and then go deep into the specialty level exams. So similarly, we do have machine learning, data analytics, database, Alexa builder. So there are a lot of paths going ahead. But to start with, we'll start with the foundational one. From the resources of the learning path that are available, definitely you can go for the courses that are available on Udemy, or for that matter, we have Cloud Guru or Linux Academy, who have good courses, I would say. So yeah, you can always take up a paid course and go through the entire course end to end. They have good recorded videos that is there. But we do have a lot of free trainings which are available by AWS itself, that we can go through to achieve the certification, to learn AWS and achieve the certification. And in all our sessions, we'll be focusing mainly on the freely available resources that are there. So yeah, just go to this link, AWS, and I'll be posting the links. I'll be sharing all those links with everyone. aws.amazon.com/training, that close descriptions. And you will find that getting started, there are a lot of digital trainings are all free. Then we do have classroom trainings. These are paid, and they're private trainings, but digital trainings should be good enough to get you started, very frankly. So to take a digital course, you need to create a account, or you need to log in through your existing Amazon account. For me, it is already signed in, so I'll close it. But yeah, you can create your account, or your Amazon account, not AWS account, your Amazon retail account, through which you do shopping. Through that, you can sign in, and you can take any of the free digital training course. And then there are ramp up guides that are present for, depending upon what role you would like to go through. You have a ramp up guide for that. So we'll go through the architect ramp up guide, and we'll see how this ramp up guide, initial, each ramp up guide is into multiple phases. Initial phase of the almost any ramp up guide would be to learn the basics, which will be the further foundational cloud practitioner course, and then we'll move on to the advanced thing. So here you can download it in a PDF format. So this is the PDF format of a ramp up guide, and we'll go through this in a moment. But in case you are more familiar with a more web-based UI, then we have this link, and here based on your role we can have a ramp up guide. So here, yeah, for example, you go for cloud architect, or anyone who is here only mainly into a business professional, or like a finance professional, or mainly into marketing and not very technical, they can go for these paths. But yeah, cloud architect I think sets for all, and we'll see which all phases should be covered by non-technical, and for technical there is no limit. You can keep on going as far as you like. So here you see it's divided into multiple stages. I would say stage 1 and stage 2 is almost common for all the roles, I would say, and then from stage 3 it depends upon which path you would like to go. Before opening for questions, I think I can go is in the foundational course, in the foundation certification course, if you scroll down, we do have exam prep resources for each of them, or you can simply click here, and for the cloud practitioner it is going to take you to the cloud practitioner certification exam page, and you can download the exam guide here. So this again is a PDF, and we'll look through this also in a moment. We'll look through, like we will keep switching probably between the ramp up guide of the architect, and we'll then map it with the cloud practitioner certification exam of different domains it have, and how we will be able to cover these 4 domains. So yeah, any questions before we proceed?
Yeah, Prasad.
Yeah,
Prasad. Am I audible?
yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So you have told us that there are certain levels like cloud practitioner, the advanced level is solution architect, and next the professional. So is it mandatory that we first do the cloud practitioner and then only we can appear for solution architect? Is it like that?
And no, for solution architect you can directly do for solution architect. Cloud practitioner is not a must. It is just recommended that if you are starting, then you should go via that path, just so that it's a phased learning. But if you want to appear directly on solution architect associate, it's very much possible. Any more questions? If not, then let us probably go to these guides. In fact, let me open 2 of them. One is this ramp up guide, and I would like to open the cloud practitioner certification. This is probably that I shared in the video. I'm not sure if you guys have got a chance to look into it or not, but yeah, I'll go through that again. So a cloud practitioner, it mainly tests 4 concepts. The first domain is cloud concepts, the second is security and compliance, third is technology, fourth is billing and pricing. So if you want to have a 4 weeks learning plan, and I agree that we have varied level of experienced people here, so few might be able to do it within a week or couple of weeks, and few might take more than 4 weeks, which is perfectly fine. But this is kind of a suggested learning path. In the week 1, which we'll be covering a bit today, is the basics of the cloud and the security and compliance aspect of it. So from the resources perspective, we'll go through the AWS white paper, which is AWS overview. It's quite large paper, but yeah, the first 8 pages should be good enough to get us started. Then from the hands-on perspective, we will create a free tier account. We'll set up a billing alert so that in case if you provision accidentally any resources which are out of the free tier, then you get an alert and you can go and deprovision those resources. And then we'll talk about identity and access management, which is mainly the way to secure your AWS account, and how do you access the various resources that are there in the AWS account. So we'll look into concepts like users, groups, roles, policies. We'll also look into like a bit of security and compliance, a share responsibility model that we have. Once you're comfortable with those concepts during the week 1, and I believe overall you should be spending around 6 to 8 hours on this section before moving on to the next section, which is the technology section. And if you see the percentage perspective, the technology section takes up the maximum percentage, which is 33%. The first 2 sections are like 25%, 26 and 25%. And the week 2, the majority of year will be the core services that we have, which might be like whether it is compute or storage or networking or database or application services. We need to dive deep into all the different offerings in the AWS core services and other AWS services. So I generally suggest a 6 hours free digital training course, and we'll look through that digital training course in a moment. And I have shared those links also in the YouTube video that I've shared before. Finally, in the week 3, it's more about billing and pricing, or how to control the cost of your AWS account, or understand the costing mechanism. For that, we do have a white paper, AWS pricing overview. It's not a very big one. I think it's around 20 pages. We can go through that, and then there'll be a lot of hands-on that would really help. There are few tabs. We'll go into the AWS billing console today to see how it looks like. But yeah, if you explore these three: billing, AWS budgets, AWS organizations, uh, through the AWS management console, doing hands-on, then I believe you are covered for this section. And finally, before giving the exam, I highly recommend going for a few practice exams. There are probably free resources available overall. AWS does publish practice questions. You can also take a paid practice exam. But there are a lot of free exam papers that are available, or you can also take up a paid practice papers that are available on Udemy. And we'll talk about those when the time comes, right? So this is a very quick overview of for cloud practitioner. But yeah, let's try and map this with the ramp up guide that we have for architect, a learning path that we have. So if you see here in the phase 0 and phase 1. So phase 0 and phase 1 would be, I would say, the full cloud practitioner, which covers it, and then we can move on to phase 2. But if you see phase 0 and phase 1, it starts with what is cloud computing, or what are the benefits of the cloud computing, or different types of deployment models of a cloud computing. All that would be covered in I would say these two. Then you should be looking into, see, like, one is a white paper and other is just a web page. But yeah, all of that can be covered through this white paper itself. It will go through. And this is the classroom training that I was talking about, free digital course. So you can browse it from here itself, and you can go to that course, create an account, and yeah, it's free, 6 hours. This is something that I say that go in the second week, not the first week. Go for it in the second week, and then once that happens, then you can move forward onto the phase 1. Here you'll see we have well architected framework. I'll be sharing few reinvent videos for the well architected framework, uh, which would be really helpful to understand that. And I believe there is a digital course also. I'll share the link for that. And then we have a white paper of how AWS pricing works. Yeah, this is something that we can go for in the week 3. Share responsibility model. We have free digital course, which is just a 5 minutes training. Go through that. We do have a web page for that, but yeah, we will be covering that here also. But yeah, this is a very important concept. It might seem to be a very small topic, but it is very, very, very important, actually, the shared responsibility model. And then we do have a full, yes, this is a training course that I was talking about, free digital training course. So go through this in the 2 hours, and that should set us up pretty much for the cloud practitioner. And then we can move on to the phase 2, which we can talk about like few weeks down the line. That once we have this basic foundational setup, then how can we build our knowledge to dive deep to prepare for AWS Solution Architect Associate exam. Hopefully that helps. If there are no questions, then probably we can go to the overview of AWS. Yeah, or feel free to ask any questions if you have. Others speak.
Prasad, when should we exactly book the exams for, like, your cloud practitioner exam? When should we book the slot?
So depending upon when you feel that you are ready, I'll say book it advance in a week. You could now book it virtually. So you can book for a virtual exam, and you can give it from the laptop itself. So I think depending upon at which phase of learning you are, whenever you feel that you are good with giving the exam in next 1 week, please go ahead and book that, I would say. Or go for a date like for 2 weeks from now. And then once you book it, right, you have a goal in mind, and then you start working towards it. So please feel free to do that. So in this group, I would say that not putting any hard deadline on anyone, but 4 weeks from now, I believe, should be a good time frame for almost everyone in this group who are willing to take cloud practitioner exam should be taking that. And if that means that by the end of July, if all of us are cloud practitioners certified, then we'll start focusing on the solution architect associate in post July.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. And you can, I do not remember the exact. You will be able to find the exact timelines on the FAQ document. I'll be sharing that of the certification FAQ. But I believe you can cancel your exam 24 or 48 hours prior to the exam, in case if you feel that you're not able to make it for the exam, or you can reschedule it 24 or 48 hours prior to the exam that you have scheduled. Okay. Any more questions?
And Prasad, you would be sharing this document to us, right, to our emails, so that we can refer it at our free time.
Yes. I will be sharing that. Okay. I'll be sharing all the documents and resources, links, everything. I'll be doing that. Okay.
Prasad, one question: is these post certifications have a end of the certification, like a validity?
Yes, for Solution Architect Associate, I know it is 3 years. I'm not very sure of the Cloud Practitioner certification. See, we'll be able to find all of this information, if you go here, and I would simply say AWS certification FAQ. So we should be able to find all this information in the certification FAQ. But yes, all of these have a specific validity. They are not for perpetual, if that helps. Okay, in this FAQ you'll be able to find almost every thing. Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, guys. Yeah, thanks. But yeah, any more questions? Please feel free to ask. If not, we will quickly move on to the white paper, which is AWS overview. So this is a white paper which is recently published, and they keep it up to date. They do have a corresponding web page also, in case if you are reading on a web page, it is more smoother to your eyes. I generally prefer PDFs. Okay, now on this particular white paper, if I go, if you see, it's a 95 pages document. It's a very big document, but we'll see what all we should be covering. Before start taking the introduction. Yes, we should be going through that. I would say, what is cloud computing? We'll go through that. Advantages of cloud computing, yes. Types of cloud computing, yes. I would say global infrastructure is really important. This is something that we should be focusing a lot. Then we have security and compliance. And in the cloud platform, I think we will be going up till here. That what are the 3 ways that we can access the cloud platform. And then after that, if you see the full content is, it's all about the different services based on the different applications that we have, and it goes quite deep. So we will come back to this probably later, when we will be looking for solution architect student, or professional exams. But if you see, starting from here alphabetically, they listed all the different applications in which we have different services. And if you go inside, for example, compute, which is important, and we will be going through this probably not via this white paper, but overall, for example, database, or for example, AWS cost management, which will be mainly for your billing and pricing things. And anyone who is interested in machine learning or IoT, they can go first for the specific. But overall, on the solution architect, I would say yes, migration and transfer would be important. Networking, content, and delivery, this is one of the most important basics of the infrastructure that is there on AWS. And then we have security, identity and compliance, and storage. So these are the major topics that we'll be covering later on. But to get started on cloud, I would say, yep, this starting from here, page number 1 till page number 8 should set us up. And we'll go through that very quickly in next half an hour. And the last half an hour, I would like to spend more on creating the AWS free tier, and doing some, going through the AWS console. And hopefully we should be able to make it in time. So let's begin. Theory, introduction. So from the introduction perspective, one question that generally comes is that how did Amazon get into AWS, how Amazon started AWS. Amazon has built expertise in building highly scalable web application, which is Amazon.com, and then they realized that they developed a core competency in operating massive scale technology infrastructure and data centers, and that's why they thought that this can be uh, helpful for others, and hence they got on a much broader mission to serve a totally new customer segment, which is like developers and businesses, and hence the Amazon Web Services came up, which can be used to build sophisticated and scalable applications. So yeah, it got started in 2006, mainly offering the IT infrastructure services, and we'll look into that, what exactly that does mean, and we'll look into the benefits of it. But it means that the uh, customers need not own the infrastructure services on their own. They can access the infrastructure services via API. So that moves us to what exactly is cloud computing. So cloud computing, I would say, is delivery of IT resources over the internet with pay as you go pricing model. So what that's meant is like on demand delivery of IT resources, and IT resources can be like a compute or database storage applications with pay as you go pricing model over the internet. So if, let's say, if you want a computer with Windows operating system with a specific size, like a RAM and hard disk, all you need to do is that you need to uh, access an API, or it's like through the AWS management console. We'll see how that can be done. You just go and provision that resources. All of that, if you see now, the whole concept of owning those infrastructure, the servers, and maintaining them, is the overhead is being now offloaded for these companies. They are being done by the Amazon, and these companies just accesses those resources. That's in a nutshell is what cloud computing is. And if you're not from a more hardware background, probably it might be a bit difficult to envision. But anyone who has worked in the data centers, they will be able to understand this, that having a data center in itself is a overhead in terms of the cooling mechanism that needs to be there, the electricity that it has to be provided, to ensure that the data center is always up and running, ensure that there is a redundancy built into the data center, so that in case if there is a failure, then the overall application does not get failed. All that maintenance is something that is very difficult to be done in a data center. So for this, as I said, there's a web page which gives you a short video which you can look through, and it explains it in more detail. And then comes to the what are the advantages of cloud computing. So it trades capital expense for variable expense. What it means is that now the companies, instead of having to own or maintain the data centers and servers like before they used to do, now they are going to they can just use them by consuming the resources. So the first 2 points I say would come as one of the advantage is like cost savings. You will not have to invest a lot of expense, capital expense upfront. You will be able to do it over the time as a variable expense, as and when you would be utilizing those resources, because it is a pay as you go pricing model. And even for the variable expense, because it's a pay as you go pricing model, it's a variable expense. Even that variable expense, using the economies of scale, because of the size of the Amazon, the variable expense is much lower than any company can achieve it on their own. Then you need stop the guessing capacity, and this is where it comes the portion of elasticity. So its elasticity mainly is that traditionally either companies, I come from a telecom background, I started my career in a telecom company, and in that for any application that we had to roll out in the production, we used to think about the capacity of how much the capacity would be needed, and need to provision that upfront. And then often not even the best guess estimate that we make, the usage might be low and the resources might be sitting idle. or there might be a peak level of activity, and the provisioning might not be enough, which leads to either a business loss or a very bad experience for the user, which people does not want. But using cloud, knowing that you can scale up and down instantly, you can provision the right amount of resources that are required. And with the tools like auto scaling, and we'll discuss about that when we dive deep, you can provision more resources when there is a more activity, and you can deprovision the resources when the level of activity decreases. Or you can schedule more resources as to provision based on the traffic. For example, let's say there is a Prime Day coming, or a Black Friday is coming, then obviously the number of resources that would be required for any retail company would be huge. So they can schedule that during that period the number of provision resources would be more, and then they can scale down after the event is completed. So increase speed and agility. For a company, they want to start a new project, and for that they need servers. Then they will have to actually probably wait for the servers to get procured. They come to the data center, and then they set it up by installing the OS patches, installing relevant softwares, and then they can start using it, right? But if you are using a cloud, then you can spin up hundreds and thousands of resources instantly, and based upon your use case, you can instantiate your resources as per your need. So that gives the tools in the hands of the developer, through which we can develop applications much faster. So here I think agility is one of the most important factors why cloud is beneficial. And then stop spending money running and emitting data centers. Here I would say this helps the company to focus their highly valuable IT resources on building applications that transform the customer businesses, rather than spending time on undifferentiated heavy lifting of maintaining and owning data centers. So this helps for companies to innovate faster. And finally, global in minutes. It means that, let's say there's a organization which needs to have presence in the entire world, then having the data centers close to their customers would be very difficult for them if they're doing it on their own. But with AWS, which has presence, and we'll talk about the global footprint that AWS has. It has a presence in 24 geographical regions and 75 availability zones, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Organizations can deploy applications very close to their end customers, and hence provide a low latency experience to their customers. So these are the major benefits of why the cloud is important, or advantages of using cloud. Now, talking about what are the types of cloud computing: 3, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. It all depends upon the level of control that you need. I generally give example of let's say if you want just a server, then you say that you need infrastructure as a service. So instead of getting a server onto your data center, you get a server from cloud, and then you provision that server or configure that server based on your need. You have the full level of control. For example, the OS that you need to install on it, or the kind of softwares that you would like to install on it, or the patching that you need to do. So you have the full flexibility of doing that. So the infrastructure as a service has the highest level of flexibility, and you provide the access to the networking features, computers. So you have the they are mainly the basic building blocks, as it says, compared to when it is platform as a service. So here, infrastructure as a service, think about that. If you want a database, you got a server and you install database on your own, whether it is Oracle database or Microsoft SQL Server database, or any other open source database like MySQL, PostgreSQL that you would like to do. When it comes to platform as a service, it's more like you are actually using the software underlying infrastructure and focus on deployment and management of your applications. Then comes the highest level of, I would say, abstraction, which is like software as a service, which you use uh, mainly as specific software. An example might be like a web email client that we have. Yeah, you do not worry about the send an email. It's a software as a service that you can use to send emails. Or we have a AWS marketplace where you will find hundreds partners have created the softwares to be used on the AWS platform. You can directly download that softwares and start using them. Then when it comes to cloud computing deployment models, the cloud, your entire application is totally on the cloud, whether it is a cloud native application or an application that has been uh, migrated to cloud, but all your resources are within the cloud itself. Then comes the hybrid, which some of your infrastructure is present on premises or your own data centers, and some of the infrastructure is present on the cloud. When large organizations think about moving to cloud, it's not that they'll be able to do it overnight. They start with cloud as an extension of their own data center and start migrating their resources slowly onto the cloud till the time their plan of the cloud migration completes. So the hybrid model is more like having both your on-premise data center as well as the cloud coexisting. And then finally, we have on-premises. A few of them also call it as private cloud, which means that you do have everything onto your own premise with full controls at your end. But it also means that you have the overhead of managing your entire data center. Then let's go to global infrastructure. And this is where probably we might spend some time. So yeah, as it says that AWS serves over 1 billion active customers in more than 190 countries. So you can understand the scale at which the AWS operates, and we are actually like expanding our global infrastructure, and we do have our whole infrastructure is mainly related into regions. We'll talk about the concepts and availability zones. Is availability zones AZ that we talk about. As a general principle, everything fails. Memory fails, CPU fails, disks fails. It's up to us how we architect them so that even if there is a failure, the overall application is still up and running. And that's where the whole global infrastructure of AWS has been designed from scratch to be resilient. The basic principle obviously is a data center. We do have a data center which has things like storage, compute, networking, power, cooling equipment. But we build resiliency by combining multiple data centers, like 3 to 8 data centers, into one availability zone. Now, one availability zone is, must have understood, a collection of data centers, and we combine multiple availability zone to make it a region. So let's go to regions. So AWS global infrastructure, if I talk about, let's go to first global infrastructure itself. So as you see, we have 24 launch regions. There are 3 regions which are announced. We have 76 availability zones. Apologies, yeah. So this is a global infrastructure map. So each of this region, I think it's getting loaded. Yeah, each of this region, if you see, for example, the region that we have here, which is the Canada Central, it has 3 availability zones, and each availability zones has multiple data centers. So when you deploy application, we need to design it in a way that it is spread across multiple availability zones, so that even if a specific availability zone goes down, then it is still the application is still working. So, and each of these availability zone has their own independent networking, independent power. So if there is a hole dug somewhere, or the networking cable is cut, it might like bring down one data center. but still your application would be there. Your whole infrastructure is still running. If there is let's say a availability zone failure, but if your application is spread across multiple availability zone, still you will be able to application will be still be accessible based on the deployment architecture that we have designed. And these availability zones are like 60 to 100 miles apart from each other. I think there is a question. Let me check the question. Will that add to my cost? So yeah, it depends upon the servers in which availability zone. So if you are having, so let's say you have a very simple web application, and it's a 3-tier web application. You have a web front end, you have an application layer, and then you have a database. So if your web application is to be deployed across multiple availability zones, then you would be needing more than one server. So based on the number of servers that are provisioned, that cost is there. Region specific prices, what type of specific resource costs within what region, it's all publicly available, and we'll go through it in the future sessions. But yes, building resiliency within your application means that you need to have more servers, and each server does cost, but it will be costing only for the time it has been provisioned. It seems there's another question. Yes, if there is a failure in one availability zone, won't it add load to another zone? Yes, it would. It's going to add a load to another zone. So we have something like elastic load balancer, which ensures that the traffic is spread across multiple availability zones and multiple servers. And if there is a failure of a specific server, then definitely the load will be more on the other servers. And then if this full entire one availability zone goes down, there would be a load would be on another availability zone. But again, having said that, there are auto scaling groups that can be configured, which will ensure that these resources, that have been deprovisioned because of a failure, get provisioned again. Yeah, more questions? How much time it will take to fail over? So yeah, we will dive deep onto these things, and I am liking it that everyone is thinking ahead of how that is going to. So in auto scaling, we do have a configuration that we can configure that for how much time do you want to wait before the load time happens. And it also depend upon when a new service opens, what all things have you configured it to be provisioned. It will also depend upon your RTO and RPO requirements, that how would you like to configure it. It all comes to from a low level of one server failing and provisioning to other, to availability zone failure, to a region failure, and you need to have a DR plan for your business continuity. And all of these would be a very important and need to be thought about from the very scratch, I would say. So important point here to understand is the difference between a data center, region, and availability zone. People sometimes think that data center is one data center that is there in a specific region, and that is what a region is. No, there are multiple data centers combined into one availability zone, and there are multiple availability zones which are combined into one region.
Ask a question.
Please.
If you have the same region, let's say London, and if you have two availability zones,
Right.
with two data centers in each availability zone, what is the difference between two data centers which are in the same availability zone or in separate availability zones, the same location? Is it just proximity to each other and connectivity, or something else?
Yeah, so let's say I have in London, I believe we have 3 availability zones, and this whole will become London region, and these would be far apart, these 3 availability zone. I would say, let's say AZ1, and when you will be provisioning resources in a specific availability zone, these are all logical names. You will not be specifically knowing which availability zone it is. These availability zone 1, 2, and 3 are logical names. That's mainly because to randomize the load on each of the availability zone. In each of this availability zone would be having multiple data centers. And yes, the proximity would be the difference. If they, let's say, and there are 3 to 8 data centers in one availability zone, so they will be having multiple data centers in each of the zone. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
What is the difference between auto scaling and availability zone? Auto scaling and load balancing. We'll come to these concepts in deep, but yeah, on a very high level. If I have a load balancer here, when the network traffic comes, then based on the load on each of the server, let's say I have 3 servers, 1, 2, and 3, it will direct the traffic to that specific traffic. So this is a load balancer that is going to balance the load. What auto scaling does, and if we configure this as to be auto scaling with we can like always configure it that what is the minimum number and what is the maximum number. So let's say minimum number of this particular group is 3, and let's say the maximum number is 6 based on factors of how much the load is. Then for any reason, this server, one of the server, let's say, goes down, then auto scaling is going to kick off, and it's going to ensure that there are minimum 3 servers are running. So it is going to provision another server. And again, how much time it will take to load, it all depends upon the configuration and how much time this particular server comes to up based on what all is being configured on this particular server. It will depend upon all that. But yeah, so here we can also configure health checks so that the load balancer in the meantime is going to route traffic just to the 2 server, and as soon as this comes up, it is going to register to the load balancer, and then it will start loading traffic to here.
Prasad, when we spin up any VM,
Yeah.
do we do it on particular data center or we just do it on the availability zone?
You mean, do you have access to that, or do you mean, do you want to know exactly where?
No, when we initiate
So when you initiate a VM, like a EC2 instance, then you specify the region and the availability zone. And as I said, availability zone are logical. So you might choose availability zone 1 and 2. Behind the scenes, it's going to allocate one availability zone for you, and you will you will not be able to even know how many data centers are there in that. So all that is extracted. You will be provided with the EC2 instance.
I think you have to do a VPC first, and you have to choose in which region the VPC goes, so that determines roughly probably where it will go.
Yeah, so VPC defines which region you are in. And we'll talk about that, people who are hearing these terms for the first time, might get a bit overwhelmed. Do not worry, guys. We will talk about, these in detail, or when you will be going through that Cloud Practitioner 6-hour digital training course, that will take you from very basics to these concepts of VPC, load balancing, auto scaling. I think we are a bit hard pressed on time, but yeah, the next concept would be mainly security and compliance, and it's one of the highest priority. I would be sharing a reInvent a link for IAM and a few videos for this. Please go through those. I'll take a moment here to explain the shared responsibility model for the security, which means that for the security part, AWS manages the security of the cloud, and the customer or who is using those resources is responsible for the security in the cloud. So the important point is off the cloud and in the cloud. What it exactly means is that from the physical data centers right up to the virtualization layer of the instance, that entire part is being taken care by AWS, whether it is the cooling or the wires, the networking, the electricity of the data centers, or even the physical security of that particular data center. That is being taken care by AWS. But when you create an application or deploy the application, then you need to take care of the application is secure enough so that it is secure. We do provide a host of security tools and a guidance which can be used to configure your application in a secure manner, whether it is access to that particular secure, whether it is the application configuration of your application, yeah, so on and so forth. So that's a particularly important concept, and I'll be sharing resources with you guys, and it will be really helpful if you guys go through those resources during the week one. From the compliance perspective, industries, whether it is in healthcare or based on which specific domain you are in, it might be a financial company. uh, it's like there are compliance requirements that are need to be met. So AWS does infrastructure are compliant with a lot of compliance programs, industry compliance programs. So yeah, please have a look at these. This will be helpful even for the exam, to know how the AWS is compliant. And as I say, we do have risk and compliance white paper. It might be way too detailed, uh, but a good introduction from that paper would really help. Yeah, before moving on to hands-on, I would like to just mention three things that we can access AWS via three ways. The first is AWS Management Console, which we'll look through right now. Today, we'll create a free tier account and we will go through the AWS Management Console. Second is via CLI. Any technical people here would be able to understand that CLI is a way to access a lot of resources in AWS or otherwise. And then we have software development kits for developers who are creating the applications in depending on which language you are using, whether it is a .NET C# or a Java program or even Node.js. You should be able to access those or consume those resources through the SDKs. So from the underlying perspective, all AWS resources can be accessed via API, whether you are using console or CLI or SDK. Underlying, it's an API which gets called. SDK gives a more easy way for developers to integrate the application, integrate the resources into the application. That's pretty much, I would say, from the AWS white paper point of view. Yeah, if any more questions, or I would like to move on to the hands-on part of it. And it seems like the session might stretch a bit. I'll try and cover it in next 20 minutes, but it might stretch a bit. So yeah, apologies for taking more time of yours on Sunday. So I believe every one of you must be having access to AWS console in one form or the other, whether it is through your company or you sign up for your AWS free tier account. If not, I'll be showing it right now, how to do it. If you want to follow along or do it right now, more than happy. Let's do that, and you would be all set up with AWS console, a free tier account. If not, do follow what we see here in the video and create an AWS account today itself. It's I would highly recommend that. So for that, let's say we go to AWS free tier. Let me know if anyone is following right now. You would just need a credit card. Don't worry, nothing would be charged. It's like $1, and it will get reversed just to validate the card. Otherwise, you should be good. So let me create a free tier account. You will need an email address. And I can give the AWS account name as same. So it's going to give you a 12 months of free access, and there are limits to them. We will see those, but while you will be provisioning resources, it will be showing you whether it is a part of free tier or not. Save this password. It gives see whether it's a professional account or personal account. It's mainly for the learning purposes, so go for the personal account. These. let me take this to a different window before I enter my card account. So I've entered my account and it says that it's going to give me a text message. Phone number, I can put it here, 7. And I verify the code, and then I can select a support plan. So there are 3 different support plans: basic, developer, and business. And we'll go for the basic one. But yeah, this is something that will be even for the solution architect associate, the kind of support plans that are available and what are the kind of features that are in the plan. So we'll go for the basic plan. And it does say that the account is created and I should be receiving an email in a moment. This doesn't matter whether you submit or not. We can directly go to sign into console, or I'll first wait for the email to come. So is there anyone who is following along right now to create a free tier account? Good. Okay. I'm happy that there are people who are doing it. Great. So I'll take it a bit slow so that you guys can do it. Okay. Hopefully we all should have got emails by now. Let me also check my email. Okay. Now I've got the email, and you sign using root user email. So you need to sign in via root users, and you can use the email address that you use to create the free tier account. Then I'll go to the next and enter the password that you have entered, and hopefully it should be take you to the AWS console. So is everyone able to enter this console who have created the free tier account? Yes. Oh, great. If everyone is able to do that, then let's go and see the full services. You will find these services area blank here because I have listed these. You must have listed, but start exploring. So we'll talk about the core services here, right? So one is compute. So in compute we have multiple ways to provision computer services. Then we do have storage. We have multiple offerings for storage. We do have database. Again, multiple offerings for database. And you will see then for the security, ID, and compliance, we do have multiple offerings. So you can go through these different types of services that AWS has. It has in almost every imaginable application area that you can think of. But to start with, first things first, we'll try and secure your account as much as possible. So let's do one thing. Let's set up to start with, billing alert. So just type billing here, go to the billing, and during week 3, explore all of these different options that we do have. But for now, let's go to the preferences and billing preferences. So here we'll be able to see all the dashboard, but yeah, let's go to billing preferences, and I'll do things that you need to ensure that you enable in a free tier account is these two. Receive free tier user alerts so that you get receiving the alerts at how much of it's being used by you in the free tier. So I'm going to receive emails. The second is receiving the billing alerts. So you need to check this so that you will set up an alarm that in case if it starts you provision a resource which is chargeable, it's not in the part of free tier, so that you get an alert and you can quickly come back and deprovision that resource. So you save the preferences, and so that manage billing alerts. There's a new feature, budgets feature, but we'll first manage the billing alerts. So clicking on this takes you to CloudWatch, and we'll talk about the CloudWatch later in our sessions. Not today, but this is where you can set your billing alert. So I would say here you can set different kinds of alarms, but here we'll focus mainly on setting up a billing alarm. So we'll go to the billing tab. And you see here, Amazon CloudWatch can help you to monitor the charges of your AWS bill by sending you email alerts when charges exceed a threshold you define. So depending upon what threshold you would like to set, just set that threshold and you'll get a notification. Okay, so I'll create an alarm. So this is that the alarm will trigger when the blue line, we'll talk about the blue line, goes above the red for 1 data points. So I'll say statistics maximum in USD. If you want to have some other currency, go ahead and do that. And the estimated charges, based on the estimated charges, it is going to trigger an alarm in a period of 6 hours. So threshold level, I would say if it goes, just to be super safe, make it as low as possible that you want, so that even if you start using any of the resources which are chargeable, you get an instant alarm. But that will within like 6 hours. Go ahead and click next. Here, what should the alarms trigger? So there are 3 states in which going to alarm, whether it is actually has been alarmed, whether the state is okay, or insufficient data. It would mean that you do not have enough data to trigger alarm. Even then it can trigger a data, but yeah, we need just when it is going to get alarm. You can create a new topic. SNS is simple notification service from AWS. It is going to notify and send it to the subscribers who have subscribed. Here we will say that the notification would be sending to the email address. So I'm going to type my email address again here, and I'll create a topic so that it is going to send a notification. So this is the auto scaling action and E2C action. We will talk about that later. This is mainly to provision more resources if it is required, or deprovision more resources based on the action. But yeah, click next. Put an alarm alert. So I'm going to give it a name, billing alert. Alarm description, that is fine. I'm going to copy paste, is anyways optional. Going to click on next, and this gives you a preview here. So whenever your charges goes beyond above this USD, it's going to trigger an alarm. Estimation charge is 0.01. Action, it is going to send it to this notification, which is my email ID, and that's it. I'm going to create the alarm. So alarm is created. It says the action is pending confirmation. It will be sending you an email. So that particular email is set. Muthu, I see that probably you are having a few issues. Let us connect after the session because we are anyways time pressed, and I'll be helping you exactly, with the issue that you are facing. Okay, now I should be getting an email. So let me again use a snipping tool. So this is the email that you'll be receiving, which you need to use to confirm the subscription so that it becomes active. So when I click on that confirm, it confirms. And then when I refresh it from here, it shows that there is no action required and the state is okay, we are good. As soon as this becomes an in-alarm state, it's going to send a mail to us. Now we are set from the billing perspective. Now we need to secure the account from the access perspective. So as I said, we do have IAM, which is Identity and Access Management. We go there, and now we are going to secure our access. So what we have right now accessed is via a root account. Root account is the account through which you have created your account. It is not a best practice to keep using root account to access your account. You should be locking away your root account completely, and you should be using the users that you will create with the privileges that is required for that users to access the account. And that's what we are going to do. So the security status right now in a new account you see is that it's not great. So you're going to set each one of them. So first, activate MFA on root account. So let's do that. we are going to activate the MFA on root account. So we are going to virtual MFA device. So you need a virtual MFA device. Yeah, so MFA is set up now for this device. I'm going to go on dashboard, and you see that MFA is active now. The next it says that you should be creating individual IAM users and use groups to assign permissions. So it's from the best practice perspective, you should be always using users within groups. Create a group and assign users to those group and apply permissions to the group instead of assigning it to specific user. It depends upon organization to organization, but that's what the best practices. So we'll start with creating a group, and we'll say the group name, because we are locking away our root account, so we need to provide admin group. And I know we are out of time, but yeah, I'll continue probably for some more time, so please feel free to hang around. Okay, good. So I'll add the group name as admin, mainly for the administrators. Policy type, there are multiple policies that are there. You can see, depending upon, these are all managed policies. And we'll talk about the policies a bit more, or I'll share resources with you to understand what the policies are. But yeah, for this particular group, we need to give them administrator access, and that's pretty much. So this the group name is admin and policies is admin access, and we have created a group. So we have now a group. Next, we are going to create users. I'll create a user. Let's say you have a user. I'll use my name. So for me, I can create one user. Access type. So this is important. Whether you're going to this particular user is going to access just the console, database management console, or is this a user who is going to have a programmatic access? When I say programmatic access, they are more of a developers who would like to, more to be accessed via a CLI or through the SDK. So for now, we'll keep it as database management console access. You can use auto-generated password or a custom password. The password reset requirement is user must create a new password at the next login. So we're going to check that. We'll keep it just auto-generated password, and we click here next as permissions. In the permissions, we are going to assign it. So if you see, you can add the user to a group which has a permission, or you can actually add permissions, copy from, if an existing user has specific permissions, you can copy that, or you can attach policy directly to the user. From the best practices perspective, it's always good to attach it to a group and give a permission to a group, so that, let's say, if you have 5 administrators in your organization, you need to assign policy to just one group, and they are assigned to that particular group. Next, tags. Tags is a way to identify the resources. They are more of a logical grouping that needs to be there so that you can organize, track, and control. It's also optional. It's not mandatory. We are going to skip it here. We are going to review. So if you see, it has got this particular user has just got 2 permissions. One is it has got through the admin through the group, and second is that he will be able to change his own password. IAM user change password. Now I'm creating the user. So as I created the user, this is my console login link, which we'll be using. But to see the password, you can use this. You can send an email, or you can download the CSV. Yeah, so download the CSV. And then I'm going to use this link to go there. Just hope this Excel does not open on this window. Yeah, good enough. So I've got Excel open in my other window. So I'm going to, my username is the username that I've used, Prasad. And you'll be given a 12-digit, every account is given a 12-digit account number. So you will be having that account number for you. And then you can sign in. So in that case, you'll have to change your password. So now if you see, I have logged in my account as a specific user who has admin privileges rather than logging in through my root account. Now if I go to back to my IAM, let's see what is the status of my dashboard. How good am I? So we are good on 4 parameters: creating visual user groups to assign permissions. Great. Rotate your access keys, which is good. All you need to do is apply an IAM password policy. So let's create a password policy. So set password policy. Let's enforce it. Okay, let's make it as hard as possible. Enable private, yes, password, so that you need to change your password every 90 days. Depending upon your organization, you might not even have expression requires administration reset, or you might want to disallow this or allow this. It will totally be based upon your preference and your organization preference. And that's it. And prevent password reuse. Yeah, and good enough. Save. So now my password policy is set. Let me go back to dashboard, and we are all green. So that gives us a good indication that yes, we have at least applied the basic minimum security for accessing our account. So I would say now lock your root account completely. It's only you who knows the username and password. Rest, whoever needs your access based on the privileges, create user and give them the actual permissions to those users. Now we'll talk about roles and policies. Though I understand that I've taken a lot more time here, but yeah, very quickly on the policy. So in fact, from that, I would say let's. If you see, so we have IAM identity, which is whether it is a IAM user or a IAM role or a IAM group. All of those are IAM identities. And an IAM role is similar to IAM user. It says that is identity and permission policies that determine which identity can do and cannot do in AWS. Let me see where exactly I'll be able to see it. Hold on, I do have those links, and I'll be sharing the links. Yeah, before that, let's start from here. The best practices for IAM. So I'll be sharing this link, but this is where you will be able to find all the best practices for IAM, few of them which we have done here, but this gives into more detail. So please go through this, and there's a video presentation also that IAM best practices. Looking at this one, which is the policies, which is forms the core here. So you can manage in AWS, the access to AWS by creating the policies and attaching them the IAM identities. Identities are either user, groups of users, or roles. Okay. A policy is an object in AWS that, when associated with an identity or a resource, defines the permission. So this is where you define the permissions. And again, here we have two kinds of managed policy and inline policy. We'll talk about that, and it is detailed in this link in quite a comprehensive way. So I will suggest you to go through this link. There are different types of policies, and yes, AWS managed policies are the ones which are already created by default. Custom managed policies are which customers can create a custom policy on their own. And inline policy is like you're not creating a policy, but you're actually creating a policy inline for a specific user, and which cannot be attached to some other user. So if we go back to the console, and if we go to the policies, as you see, there are a lot of policies. Let's see how the administrator access policy looks like. So it's going to give you the summary of, for what all services it has and what all access level it has on what all resources. So it says that it has services on all the 233 services that we have. It has resources on access on everything and have the full access of everything. But let's look at the JSON part of it. How does, the policy is defined in a JSON. So how does JSON looks like it? So this is a simple. So effect is allow. Action is like all the actions on all the resources. And we will have to, look more into or understand more into how these policies can be defined. Let me go into a more specific policy. Let's say a policy for EC2 instance. So for, let's say I'm giving access only for Amazon EC2 full access. So if I go to this policy, if we see this JSON file, it says that for EC2, effect is allow, and all the actions for that particular EC2 and the resources star. So this is, in the statement, this is how we do define all the policies. I'll be sharing links with you guys so that you can understand these JSON policies in a much more detailed manner. But if you are looking to create a new policy, let's say I'll create a new policy. Do I have it here? Yeah, I said here. Then you can do it either visually or through the JSON. So visually is good to start, but it's eventually good to understand the JSON part, especially who are looking for solution architect associate exam, or technical who are planning to work on AWS. So from the visual perspective, you can choose a service, which service you want to provide, and then accordingly you can move ahead. So let's say I choose S3, which is a storage service, and then all actions, or you want to have specific actions. So let's say if I have to manage specific actions, I can go there. If not, yeah, access level, whether it is, so all S3 actions. So if I go only for list, so it's going to tell me that it's only for the list. So you can play around with this here, and then at the end you should be able to review the policy. One warning. Second is error, you require to choose a resource. Yeah, obviously we'll have to choose a resource. So on a specific resource or all resources. If you want to have it on the all resources, you can have all resources, and then you can review the policy. So we are giving this as a policy that he can list all the resources for the S3. You can provide the name, description, and create the policy. And now this becomes a customer managed policy, which you can assign it to either a IAM user or a IAM role or other resources. This is pretty much that I had to explain. I would like to go back to the ABAP ramp-up guide, and yeah, it might seem a lot to people who are hearing for the first time, and it might seem to be way too basic for people who have been working on AWS for long. But yeah, irrespective, I feel that it might be helpful, or would have been helpful to all of you guys. I would say start focusing on phase 0 and phase 1. Spend as much time as possible. Yeah, we'll meet next week, and we'll be in touch during the weeks. In case if anyone has any problem, feel free to reach out. Thank you and happy learning.